close the door, don't disturb me. It's time to stand up tall and say some things about the shitty world we're living in with the boys at Raconteurs News. C'est raconteurs, c'est raconteurs, c'est raconteurs news, raconteurs news, raconteurs news, raconteurs news, raconteurs news. Oh yeah.
And good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News. It is Monday, sorry. Raconteur, we've changed. It used to be Raconteurs 2 on a Monday, but now we're just going to call it Raconteurs News. I think Aidy's done a runner from the radio, so it looks like I'm taking over his show. Anyway, good evening. Hope you're all feeling very well. It's my first time tonight producing for myself. Andy's gone out. I think he's gone to him and Tina have gone to a swingers club or something like that, so they're out tonight. So I'm producing for myself. It's the first time, so let's hope that everything goes as well as we hope it does. I've got a great guest tonight, but first of all, I want to say a big thank you. I woke up this morning and on my Twitter feed, I noticed that somebody had said. I noticed that somebody, a Raconteurs News listener, has donated a laser printer. Thank you, darling. My wife sat behind me, starting me out. A laser printer has been bought for the Jeremy Bamber. You said Jeremy Kyle, didn't you? That's how bad it is, you see. I'm all nervous. It's because I'm all iddledy-piddledy-poo. Somebody's bought and donated a laser printer to the Jeremy Bamber campaign. I know that is going to be extremely helpful for them because when they're copying documents and they're getting them. So thank you, a big thank you from Raconteurs News and from the Jeremy Bamber campaign as well to that very generous listener. We've got some great listeners, and that gave me this morning when I saw that, it gave me a little bit of a nice feeling inside that I felt like we were actually, doing something. Someone's actually listening to us. So thank you very much to those. Like I say, listening to Raconteurs News. We are untwisted, unsweetened news, and we are still here. So I'd like to introduce, without further ado, our guest this evening. Now, we've got quite a emotive subject, and our guest is not in her home country at the moment. She's currently in Texas. But I'd like to welcome from RadioFreeSouthAfrica.com and plenty of other places, Karin-Smith. How are you doing, Karen?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Jason.
Excellent. So we had a chat the other day, didn't we? Just about half an hour, 45 minutes. And my God, there's plenty of information, and there were some things that came out in that chat that I didn't realise. So, what I want you to do is, before we start, you said you'd give us a rundown of the real history of South Africa, not this sort of sugar-coated thing that we get at the moment, where it's all sweetness and light, and the South African revolution's just, apartheid's been destroyed. So you give us how you see history, your version of events, or the true history, if that's what you want to call it.
Jason, the world has been fed such a dish of lies about South Africa. And unfortunately, that has led to what the situation in South Africa is today, and the absolute media blackout on what is happening in South Africa, which is a disgrace. And so I would like to address first some of the most important lies about South African history, because without understanding that, you will not understand the problems today. Mm-hmm. So it's important to start right back at the very beginning in 1652. Unfortunately, we have to go that far back because the lies start there.
Right.
In 1652, the Dutch East India Company sent Jan van Riebeeck to the Cape to establish a way station for ships going to the east to trade for silks and spices, because there was nowhere along the route to get fresh water, fresh vegetables, and fresh meat. And the sailors were dying of scurvy and other unmentionable diseases because there was no stopping place along the way. And the Dutch, being very canny traders like the Scots, they knew how to squeeze a penny and how to make things work. They decided that this was a good thing to do. But he was under strict instructions not to colonize the Cape. That was not the plan.
Right.
The plan was just to develop a tuck shop for passing ships. So he landed there with, I think it was 52 Dutch people. Most of them were indentured servants. And they landed there, and their instruction was to trade vegetables and fruit with the locals for meat and to ensure that the ships passing by were fully stocked, which is what he did. Now, when they landed there were no black Africans in the southern part of Africa at all.
None whatsoever. I mean, we were talking about this before. I got quite confused because you were talking about you talk about the whites, blacks, and then the indigenous population who weren't black. Is that what you're saying?
No, they are not black, and they will. It's a murdering offence to call them black. They are not black. They are small people. Now you think of the noble African savage as this tall, stately black person. These people, who are known as Hottentots, Bushmen, Khoi, they're actually the Khoi people, but people know them better as Bushmen. They are very short in stature. They are not black. They're more Asian colored. They're not quite yellow. They're more orange than yellow. They're a small people. They don't speak a language anything like the black tribes speak. They speak in a series of clicks and whistles that a Western tongue cannot get their way around. I have tried, because I speak to the king and queen quite often, and I have tried to learn some words in their language, but my mouth just will not do it. Their language is totally different, and even archaeologists have said that these remains of ancient Khoi are nothing like the blacks that come from North Africa. So for 125 years after the Dutch landed there was no contact with blacks whatsoever, only the Khoi. Now, that is a fact that one needs to have firmly entrenched. Otherwise, you will be like other people that we stole the black land from Africans and have to give it back. Mm-hmm. They had no claim to it because they were not there. The Khoi were small groups, family groups, nomadic peoples who had cows. They made their homes out of leather tents that they could fold up and carry on their backs. They lived in harmony with nature. They never killed animals just for the sake of killing them. They would kill and use every part of the animal, and they would pray to the animal's gods before they killed them to apologize for the necessity of killing such a nice animal. The whites had many, many run-ins with Khoi because they would trade animals for beads and copper and things like that, which the Khoi thought was a fair trade because that was the trading habits of that time. But the Khoi having very little idea of owning anything, because they say they do not own the land. They are curators of the land. It is given to them to hand on to future generations in better condition than they found it. So they had little idea of ownership. So you would buy cattle from them, but they still owned them. So they'd go and take them back.
Right.
And that led to an awful lot of, it was called the 100-Year War with the Khoi, because there were skirmishes all the time. It was a total misunderstanding between the two groups as to what ownership meant.
Yeah.
The whites, I've bought it, it's mine. And the Khoi, no, it's not yours because nothing belongs to anybody.
Right.
So they had endless skirmishes about this. And they did treat the Khoi very badly. I have to say that from the beginning of their Khoi's interaction with other groups of people, they have been treated horrifically badly. Anyway, as these indentured servants bought their way out of their indenturedness, they were then given a plot of land by the Dutch East India Company to farm on their own. But they had to sell to the Dutch East India Company at prices set by the company.
Right.
And this irked them. They did not like this at all. There was no free market at all, even though they were now free men, which led to an uprising later on. The free citizens rose up again. Oh, excuse me.
Go on, Gil, cough it up.
Pack it down, have another cigarette. It led to an uprising, which was called the Free Citizens Uprising, which didn't go very far, but they got fed up with this price control and selling only to the company. They couldn't sell direct to the ships at a price set by themselves. Anyway, a while later, the French Huguenots arrived at the Cape, and they brought a certain amount of civilized living. Instead of these men who'd arrived without women, so they interbred with the Khoi and created a race that we call coloureds in South Africa. They intermixed breeds. They didn't have women in the beginning, so they interbred with the Khoi women. Instead of that, the French Huguenots, who were escaping religious persecution in Europe, came with their fine ladies and their linens and their laces and their fancy houses and brought a touch of elegance and respectability to this rough and tough place called the Cape.
Mm-hmm.
And the Freeburgers did not like this at all. They are very Calvinistic people, very religious, and they thought that this loose living was disgusting. And they actually wanted no part of this whatsoever, because these people showed their ankles, the women showed their ankles stepping out of the carriages, etc. And this was just not on whatsoever.
Right.
And they wore fancy hats and jewelry. They didn't like this. So the Cape was then handed over to the British during the Napoleonic Wars as part of war settlements and whatever, and then handed back to the Dutch, and then handed back to the British. It changed hands a lot of times. And these, we'll call them Boers, which in Afrikaans is a farmer, which is what they were at that time. Today, a Boer to the Africans means any white person, but in those days, it meant exactly what it said, a Boer. They had also developed a language to enable them to speak with the Khoi. So instead of speaking High Dutch and the Khoi language, they developed Afrikaans, which in those days was known as Kitchenkaffer, which is a word you cannot use in South Africa today. It's the equivalent of nigger,
Okay.
and you don't use it today. But in those days, that was what the language was called. And the language was developed for those two groups of people to communicate. Anyway, these people spoke Afrikaans. They worshipped a very strict God. They believed firmly that they're one of the lost tribes of Israel. And they are very, very, very God-fearing people. So they got fed up with this loose living in the Cape and paying taxes without representation. And they decided, this is 100 years later, they decided that they were going to get away from this lot and find a place where they could live free from these people, free from taxation, and live their own way with their own religion and nobody telling them what to do. So they did what the Americans did. They built their wagons, took family groups, climbed into their wagons, and started the great trek north. And that is when they first met with black Africans.
Okay.
The whole bunch of them heading south, and they killed tens of thousands of blacks on their way. It's called the Defakani or the Mafakani. They swept south looking for greener pastures for their cattle, and on the way they annihilated every tribe in sight. They would take the women, turn the children into slaves, take the cattle, and kill all the men. And we don't know, because there's no written history. They had no writing, so we don't know the figures. But as far as we can work out, it went into the millions of blacks were killed by this lot sweeping south, while the Boers were starting to go north. And these two lots met at the Fish River. Now, the Khoi had also never seen these black people and were stunned. I mean, the whites were shock enough to them, but these black people, where did they come from? Who were they? They're savages. They kill everything in sight. They were stunned as well. Anyway, the Boers and the blacks, now they were not a tribe at that time. They were just a mixture of all the blacks that they had found on their way south. They didn't have a name. They didn't have a king. They were just this horde of marauding savages, literally. And the whites met up with them. And they were stunned at the sight of the whites, because they had wagons, they had wheels, they had writing, and they had rifles. And these people had assegais. And they were stunned. So they called them the White Wizards. And they were a little bit scared of wizards, because the blacks have a very
superstitious?
Superstitious nature. They have witch doctors to this day. They have witch doctors who tell them how to run their lives. And they were stunned at this group of people. There were many, many battles between the two lots. But the two that I would like to talk about, one is historic. It has never happened before and never happened again. It's gone down in the annals of history as the most amazing battle ever fought. The whites knew that they were going to have to take on these warriors at some stage. So they decided that they would choose the time, the place anyway, that was best for them. So they left their women and children many miles away, and they found a place on the banks of what is now called the Blood River, where they circled their wagons, they formed a laager, and they waited for this battle to come to them. Now, what they did was they put thorn bushes in between the wheels of the wagons so the blacks couldn't crawl in and get there. The young boys reloaded the equipment, the rifles, because they had those front loaders that you could fire one at a time. You had to put in the powder and then the bullets and then tamp it down with a cloth. Mm-hmm. It took forever to reload. So they had the young boys reloading, the men fighting. Now, there were 552 men and boys in this encampment. And they prayed for 7 days and 7 nights. And they said, Lord, if you give us the victory, we will commemorate this day to you as a day of prayer in perpetuity, forever and forever. And on the 16th of December, the blacks came. And they rose up out of the bush. Now, these warriors are daunting because they are tall, they are black. They beat their spears against their leather shields, which makes a horrifying noise, and they hiss. So out of the bush rose this mass, and the noise sounded like a hurricane coming towards them, this hissing and beating on their shields. And there were, as far as we can tell, 15,000 of them against these 552 in their little laager of wagons. Well, the battle lasted the entire day. And at the end of the day, there were 3 white people lightly wounded. And there were, as far as we can tell from history, 3,000 blacks lying dead in the field of battle.
Oh.
And the Boers said, "Thank you, Lord." And the 16th of December, to this day, is the Day of the Covenant or the Day of the Vow, depending which part of history you're looking at. And it is still commemorated to thanks to the Lord for giving them victory in that heavily uneven battle.
Wow. And so the South African, I just want to quickly recap, just for anybody that's just joining us. I've got Karin-Smith here from, she's South African. She lives in Texas at the moment. And we've got so much to talk about. I think we're going to probably have to get you back again next week for another hour. But South African history is not quite as black and white, if you'll pardon the pun, as we're currently told, and you know, we seem to have this need as being white to believe these horror stories that we're told that are done by white, and by the sounds of it, there was plenty of killing and things done by whites on blacks, and at that time. But how do we get to where we are? How did we get to where we are today, where we've got there's tons of history, South African history, even recent history with apartheid and Botha and Mandela. I mean, we had an interesting chat about Nelson Mandela, didn't we, the other day? So we're moving away from the history just for a minute. Where are we at now? What's the situation like in South Africa?
Well, the situation today in South Africa is horrific. If the world thinks that the apartheid oppressed the blacks, they need to take a look at South Africa today. Mm-hmm. Because in South Africa today, there are possibly 3.5 million white people out of a population of between 50 and 70 million. And that is the entire white population of South Africa, who since 1994, when Mandela became president of South Africa, have had their firearms taken away from them. They have had all rights taken away from them. They have no voice in parliament. They have had affirmative action laws implemented, which in reality mean that white people can never get a job. They can't go to university. They have no education, because in South Africa today, 30% is a pass for the blacks, not for the whites.
Okay.
There are 1 million of those 3.5 million whites living in abject poverty with no government assistance whatsoever. Big companies cannot donate to whites because they will get points deducted from their broad-based black economic empowerment points, which means that they have to give to blacks only. So the whites in South Africa today are suffering worse than any blacks suffered under apartheid. 85,000 whites have been tortured to death since 1994. 4,000 white farmers have been tortured to death since 1994. They are having their land taken away from them without compensation. The situation is dire in South Africa today.
But that's not been reported, is it? That's not the story that you will get from your fluffy BBC or CNN or whatever. You'll not get that view broadcast for a start, will you? I was quite shocked at how few whites there were actually in South Africa.
Well, that's funny, because you were shocked at how few. But the thing that I run into most often is you're from South Africa, but you're white. You can't be. The world seems to think that South Africa is now totally black, There are no whites. And if the present government has its way, there will be no whites shortly. But yes, it's very strange that since 1994, when Mandela took office, there has been a complete news blackout worldwide about South Africa. It became the Rainbow Nation. Everything is unicorns and rainbows, and we don't need to look at it any further. And nothing could be further from the truth than that. You need to be looking at South Africa in order to see what is coming to every country on earth that is white run and run properly. Because these people in Africa have destroyed their own countries. They are starving. They are at war with each other. And now they want to flee to a white country, which they'll do the same too. You can see that happening in Europe right now. The rape, the murders, the horrible things that are happening in Europe are a direct result of not looking at South Africa, because South Africa is the blueprint for the world.
So you think that that's coming everywhere then? You think that that's going to just be everywhere? Because it seems to me, when we were talking the other day, it seems to me that South Africa's completely upside down, whereas most people, most countries, civilized nations anyway, they will put extra protections in for people who are minorities. Now, it seems to me if there's only 3.5 million white people in South Africa, it seems that it's open season on white, especially the farm. You were telling me about the farmers. How many did you say this weekend?
There were 7 farm attacks.
7 farm attacks. And what are they doing with these farms once they've tortured them and got rid of the white people out of the farm? What are they doing with them?
They're giving them to blacks, and they become totally useless. I can give you 2 examples of farms in South Africa. Now, when the black government came in, they decided that we have to give the land back to the blacks because we stole it from them. So whites' duty is to give it back. So they started out small. You had to give X amount of your farm to your farm employees. It had to be theirs. And then it got bigger and bigger to the extent that if a black tribesman said that 300 years ago, my ancestor grazed goats on this property and I'm claiming it, the courts would find that you had to give it to this black tribesman. And at that stage, they were promising to pay what they decided was fair market value for your farm. So there were 125,000 commercial farms in South Africa in 1994. There are now 30,000 commercial farming people in South Africa, where now the population is exploding, especially with people coming from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, all these illegal people. Estimates, because you can't get figures out of South Africa, but they estimate that there are 20 to 30 million illegal blacks in South Africa right now. So the population is exploding. The farming community is getting smaller by the minute. And of those 30,000 farms, 20,000 are on the market. They will never be sold because nobody is going to buy a farm under today's conditions. Because a law has recently been passed that says they can take any property without compensation. Now, it's being held up in the courts at the moment, that law, but the Blackland First and the opposition party, Economic Freedom Fighters, have said if this law is not in place by the 31st of December, which is a few weeks away, they are coming for the land by any means necessary. Now, I would think that they're already using any means necessary, torturing people to death. But and it's horrific torture. We have spoken about this. This is not what the government calls it. They say it's normal crime or an interrupted burglary. And that's how it goes in the books as. It is torture. They sit for days and torture these families with electric irons, with drills, with boiling oil, with drown kids in boiling water, rape with broken bottles and pointed sticks. And they have been told by the witch doctors that the cure for AIDS is sex with a virgin, which in their minds is a white baby. So they will kidnap and rape white babies in order to cure them of AIDS. So if the baby survives the rape, they then have HIV/AIDS. So, this is barbaric. And the government calls it normal crime and refuses to put anything in place to protect the farmers. They don't seem to understand that without the farmers, they're going to be a Zimbabwe where they're eating rats because there is nothing left in that country. Not a farm, not in anything. They're eating rats. But the government of South Africa doesn't seem to either know or care that this is the end result of what they're doing.
Wow. And this is all hid. I mean, I can't believe that there's all this hidden history that's kept from us. All this hidden history and all the hidden stories behind it all. I mean, if you like you say, it's unicorns and rainbows, and people have this this idyllic look, this idyllic. God, what's the word I'm looking for?
Concept.
An image. Yes, we've got this this image that everything's got. As soon Nelson Mandela came along, he got out of prison, and then he became president, and everything just turned into, like you say, unicorns and. Yes.
It's actually quite frightening that in 1994, South Africa dropped off the world map. And the only thing that they've spoken about in the news here, anyway, since then, is the death of Mandela and the Oscar Pistorius trial.
Right.
Other than that, nobody has looked at South Africa again. And no matter what we try and do to draw attention to it, your own Britain's Katie Hopkins, the other day, she was at the UN, and she said to them, look, I am demanding that you put the farm murders in South Africa on the UN agenda. And they voted it down. They wouldn't even put it on the agenda. So, to me, the fact that our president sings Kill the Boer, he sings Bring Me My Machine Gun to kill the Boer. And Julius Malema, who's the head of the Economic Freedom Fighters, he sings Kill the Boer. Now, if they are allowed before Parliament and before every rally to sing those songs, it is an incitement to the populace to go out and kill whites. Mm-hmm. And the world refuses to look at it. Why? Why is my question.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get an answer to that question, are you, anytime soon?
No, we're not. But we keep trying. And I give high marks to Katie Hopkins for doing that.
Well, at least it's nice that somebody's finally got something nice to say about her.
Well, she did that for South Africa. And whether Brits like her or don't like her is beside the point. She had the courage to stand up and say this is wrong, because Britain and the US bear a huge amount of blame for what is happening in South Africa today, because they sold South Africa down the river and caused this. They caused what is happening today. So they are not prepared to go back and say, oops, we made a big mistake.
No.
That's my opinion, that they don't want to admit their part in this.
So what's your opinion on? What I know the answer to this already, but what do you think to Nelson Mandela? What do you think were going on there?
Okay, there are two things about Nelson Mandela that people lie about. They lie about the fact that the apartheid government did not provide education for the blacks, and that is why they're such savages now, because they were not educated. Nelson Mandela is a product of apartheid-era education for blacks. He went to school under apartheid. He went to a black university under apartheid. He got his law degree under apartheid, as did Mahatma Gandhi, just by the way. So the story that we did not educate the blacks, we held them down and refused to educate them, is a lie. It was very difficult to do any of the things that they demanded. They demanded to be taught in their own languages. There were no books in their own language, and they don't have words for scientific and mathematical concepts. There are no words in their languages for that. How do you then teach them in their own language? I mean, it becomes, never mind. Their demands were impossible to meet, but they demanded, and the world said, yes, we must do it. So Nelson Mandela, he was a terrorist. He was tried on 154 counts of treason and sedition and murder and bombings and trying to overthrow the state. And at his trial, he didn't even argue 150 of the charges. He didn't even argue them. He was guilty of them, fine. And he asked Amnesty International, which is an extremely left-leaning group based in the USA, he asked them to please monitor his trial and come to his defense. And they said, we cannot defend you. This trial is fair, absolutely fair. You are terrorists. We cannot defend you. So the story of the rest of the world, that this man was a saint and a hero that deserves statues put up to him all over the world, is absolute nonsense. And as for his jail sentence, they found him guilty, and they decided that they didn't want to make a martyr of the man, which they did anyway in the end. So they would not hang him. They would put him in jail for life. Now, if any country had a man convicted of those charges, it was hanging offenses, but they didn't do it.
Okay.
So they put him on Robben Island. Now, this famous jail cell of Nelson Mandela's on Robben Island, where all the dignitaries in the world have to go and visit, because poor Nelson Mandela, yes, he did spend 17 years on Robben Island of his 27 years in prison. But after that, firstly, our president went to him in 1982 and said to him, you can get an unconditional release from prison if you renounce violence. And he refused.
Who was that? Who was the president? Was it de Klerk?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it was de Klerk at that time in
Botha?
82. It was Botha.
Yeah.
And from pressure from the outside world, he offered him unconditional release. And while he was in prison, which is another thing the world doesn't pay attention to, he wrote the book called How to Be a Good Communist. So the world knowingly put a communist in charge of South Africa in 1994. Knowingly did that. But anyway, so after 17 years, he was then put into Pollsmoor prison, which is a prison on the mainland. And after that, he was given this cottage on Pollsmoor grounds. Well, it was a 4-bedroom house with a swimming pool, a snooker room, a valet, a chef, a personal secretary. He entertained dignitaries from all over the world in his prison cell, which nobody who goes to Robben Island to look at his cell there, nobody goes to look at his cottage where he was imprisoned for his last years. Anyway, in the 80s, the apartheid government started dismantling apartheid, but the world didn't take notice of this either. And during that period, the world put incredibly hard sanctions on South Africa. Now, at the time, we were fighting a war on our borders, a border with Angola. All our children were conscripted after they left school to go and fight the Cubans and the Russians on our borders. And the world was behind us because we were the last defense against communism in Africa. And we were fighting these people. The ANC's armed wing was being trained by the Cubans and the communists to come and carry out urban warfare in South Africa. So we were fighting the war on our borders, and we were fighting the urban warfare by Mandela and his cronies in our own country, while we had all these sanctions against us. Now, South Africans are incredibly creative people, and they created petrol out of coal because we couldn't get petrol. They created the most incredible military equipment, which the rest of the world wanted to buy, but couldn't because of the sanctions. They did the first heart transplant. They are incredibly creative people, but the pressure from the outside world was immense. And the red line for the United States for lifting sanctions was freeing Mandela. So in 1992, the government came to the voting populace, which was totally white at that time, and asked this question, and this is where they misled us from the very beginning. Should we continue to negotiate with Nelson Mandela for peace talks leading to power sharing in the country? And the whites, who were battle weary, had lost their sons, their brothers, their children. They'd lost their lives to these two battles we had going on in South Africa. We'd lost a lot of people to Nelson Mandela's bombs in railway stations, police stations, and other places. We were battle weary, and we said, yes, continue to negotiate. Within 2 years, we had turned us over lock, stock, and barrel to a communist government where we had no voice whatsoever. And we were sold out.
You were sold a power sharing deal.
Yes.
And it ended up just being Mandela and the ANC, African National Congress, isn't it? ANC.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it just ended up being them.
Totally. And I have to tell you, another myth is that we killed thousands. We practically stepped over the dead bodies in the streets, that we killed under this dreaded apartheid rule. A bigger lie has never been told. The murders in South Africa were 700 a year under apartheid, mostly black on black. And under this government, the black government, 135,000 a year murders. 52 a day acknowledged by the communist government, but the Interpol and the mortuaries in South Africa tell us that it's probably double that number.
Wow.
A day.
So give us those numbers again. Staggering.
700 a year murders in South Africa under the apartheid government. These thousands of dead bodies that we killed black. 135,000 murders a year under this government that they acknowledge. And that's a lie. They lie. Because if you double that, according to Interpol, if you double that number, it's 270,000 murders a year.
That's incredible. That's an incredible amount of people to be murdered in a year.
It is horrific. And yet the world has turned their back on it. Everything is wonderful in the Rainbow Nation. It is disgusting. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu was in charge of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they were looking at crimes under the apartheid government. And even they had to admit that the sudden explosion of murders and deaths at the end of the apartheid era, between 1992 and 1994, was the Inkatha Freedom Party, which is the Zulus, fighting the ANC to see who would take power when freedom came. So it was black on black murder, not white on black. And to this day in South Africa, you will struggle to find a white on black murder. It is black on white and black on black. And I'm telling you that the blacks under this rule have said they want apartheid back because they were employed, they were safe, they had less problems, the streets were clean, everything worked under apartheid. They want it back because this government of theirs, under President Zuma, who was a goat herd for his father and never went to school. He learned to read and write from a junior school dropout. He never went to school, and he is president of a country. It's craziness.
Is he still president?
He is still president.
Because wasn't there some corruption or some scandal?
Huge. When he came into power, there were 700 criminal charges. 700 criminal charges against him, including rape.
And he gets to be president.
He gets to be president.
But it seems that South Africa has a lot of presidents that have a lot of charges against him.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, you have no idea. You have no idea. If you look at the corruption in South Africa, one good thing that has come of this is a British public relations company called Bell Pottinger. They agreed to build a good image for Zuma and his friends, the Guptas. And they then developed a whole load of racist things that the ANC government could use to make them look better. They invented white monopoly capital, which is the cry of the blacks in South Africa today. But they got caught out. And they are now, the corruption and the involvement of international companies is being investigated by the FBI and British intelligence. And that is shining a bit of a light on the situation in South Africa. They're not looking at farm murders. They're not looking at the white problem, but they are looking at South Africa, which is a huge thing. After 22 years, nobody has looked at them. So something is being looked at in South Africa. And we are hoping that this spreads to the general situation in South Africa. Because one of the first things that Mandela did was disarm the populace. And that is what has led to this being able to happen, that whites are being murdered so hugely. I am not saying that the black population is not suffering, because they are so downtrodden, so uneducated, so helpless and hopeless. There's no employment for them, because in this year alone, by about May, I think 58,000 people had been put out of their jobs in South Africa because they've been downgraded to junk status by Standard & Poor's and the rest of those people. And they estimated then that by the end of the year, 1 million jobs would have been lost in South Africa. Now, there aren't a million whites working, that is blacks as well, put out on the street without hope of another job because big companies are leaving, because the ANC government has decided that you have to give 51% of your company, you have to give it to the blacks. And where mines are concerned, it has to be 70%. Now, how does a company with shareholders just give away 51% of their shareholding? It's not possible if you're answerable to shareholders. So the big companies are leaving in droves. The mines are closing down because the blacks are demanding such high salaries. It's not economic to keep on operating. And if they have to give 70% of the mine to blacks, well, it's not going to work. So they're just closing and leaving. So General Motors has left. Peugeot has left. A number of big car companies have left. The mines and agriculture are the biggest industries in South Africa. So there are very few farms left. If they do take them away without compensation, there'll be no working farms left. The country's finished. And then what? And then
it's a tale of woe, isn't it? I mean, it did come as a bit of a shock to me that things were as bad as this when we did have that discussion, and I'm sure it comes as a shock to a lot of our listeners as well here on Raconteurs-news, because you just have no idea the scale, the murders for a start. I mean, you're talking 270,000 murders a year. That's just incredible.
In a tiny country. I mean, really, South Africa is, in American terms, I don't know how to equate it to the UK, but it's 1.5 times the size of Texas in American terms. So it's not an enormous country. It's scary that this is happening, and the world is just not looking. It's horrifying. And you know, a murder in South Africa is not a drive-by shooting. We haven't even spoken about Winnie Mandela and necklacing. And we haven't spoken about the xenophobia and the xenophobic attacks and the murders of other countries' citizens in South Africa. It is horrible. And the blacks take to the streets in their thousands in protest against the lack of electricity, the lack of all the freebies that the government has promised them that haven't come to pass. And then they take to the streets and they burn entire towns down. Recently, they burned down a town called Kalini, just because. So they burnt the town, burnt the farms surrounding, and nothing happens to them. Nothing happens. It's fine. And of the murderers who may be a small percentage are caught, only 13% make it to courts. And then of those, a very minute percentage get convicted. And they go to court and they say, we tortured them to death because they were white. End of story. Then it's fine.
Well, it's like you say, it's absolutely staggering. I think we're going to go over, a little bit more time, because I wanted to get into the myth of Winnie Mandela. And
yes.
we did speak about her and the football teams that she ran, and so take it away on Winnie. I was going to say I wanted to touch on Winnie Mandela, but I don't think I do.
Winnie Mandela, the mother of the nation, this revered wife of Nelson Mandela. So while he was in jail, she was getting up to a whole bunch of nefarious things and was arrested a couple of times. She ran a thing called the football club. Now, the football club had nothing to do with football. They did not play football. They were her fixers. Anyone that she didn't like, they dealt with. And this particular young man called Stompie, did not carry out her commands the way she wanted them. So she said, we need to find a way to punish this man that suits his crime. And she invented necklacing. Now, necklacing, you fasten the person's arms to their body and you tie their feet, preferably with barbed wire. You put a car tire over their body, you fill it with petrol, and you set it alight. And you dance around them chanting and screaming with joy while they're burned to death. Now, this method of killing people, Winnie Mandela, during the so-called struggle, free at the end of apartheid, said, with our necklaces and our matches, we will free this country. And the funny thing about that is that I have never heard of necklacing being used on a white person. It may have happened, but to my knowledge, it's never been used on a white person.
Right.
It is used to this day, black on black. They use this method of burning people in the streets, and it is totally disgusting. Anyway, Nelson divorced her when he came out of jail. But she is the mother of the nation. She is revered amongst black people, and yet she was as bad, if not worse, than her husband.
Yeah, she's. I remember all the football teams and the corruption and the stuff that was going on back in the 80s, and like you say, the mother of the nation. She's a bit of a tough mother.
She never even went to jail for the murder of Stompie. Never went to jail. It just amazes me, and I'm sure that when things really come to light, which they must one day, she was the one carrying out her husband's commands while he was in jail. Because he founded the armed wing of the ANC called Mkhonto Isizwe, and our present president was in intelligence gathering in MK, and all of the people in parliament today, most of them anyway, are what they call cadres. They are buddies from Mkhonto, where they all fought in the struggle together. So whether they're qualified or not to hold a government position doesn't matter. They were buddies in the murdering of blacks during the struggle years, and so they deserve a place. We rank top in the world for corruption. Zuma, if his day in court were to ever come, he would never see the light of day again, because even now, do you know that he has got 5 wives? He had 7. He has 5 wives. He doesn't know how many children he's got. It's around 21, which the taxpayer pays for. But that kind of marriage is not legal in South Africa. You cannot have more than 1 wife. So, the whole thing is just beyond anybody's trying to understand. You can't wrap your head around the situation there.
Oh God, it's So, what do you think the future is for South Africa then? Because it seems. Do you think it has got any future? I mean, what's it? Are we going to end up? Is it going to end up with like some dystopian stuff? Like future. That's what it sounds like to me.
If it is allowed to continue on its present course, it is going to end up like Zimbabwe, and it has the begging bowl out to the international community anyway. But it is going to become the problem of the international community to feed and take care of South Africa. There is one ray of light, one, and that is that the Khoi King, after many, many attempts, finally got the United Nations to accept the Khoi as the original peoples of South Africa, with all the benefits that go with that. If you are the original peoples of any country. You are entitled to a country of your own, ruled by your own kings and under your own laws. But he tried every legal avenue to get the ANC to accept this, and they refused. The Khoi, as far as the ANC are concerned, are not a people. I don't know what they are. If they're not people, I'm not sure what they are. There are about 4 million of them in South Africa. So eventually, 2 years ago, or thereabouts, some white people went to the Khoi king and said, look, there are 4 million of you. There are approximately 4 million of us at that time. And there is the colored community. The colored community identifies more with the whites, are more Afrikaans speaking, and vote with the whites than anyone else in South Africa. If we join forces, and if you now secede from South Africa, because they will not give you your legal, international legal rights, and we join forces and have a country where we are all safe, this would be a good thing, and you have the international right to do this. So after speaking to international lawyers, after considering this for a long time, after looking into everything for a number of years, on the 24th of September of this year, the Khoi king stood up in front of Cape Town Castle, which Jan van Riebeeck built. He put his staff in the ground and claimed the area from Cape Point up to the Fish River, where they first up with blacks, as the Khoi lands. Now, one would think that there would have been huge international attention to this move by the king, because secession is a big thing in the world at the moment. What with Catalonia? Nobody, not one news report, nothing. The ANC are thinking if they ignore it for long enough, it'll just go away. We were the only ones, Conscious Consumer Network arranged for somebody on their cell phone to give a live feed to the world, because we thought if we did that, the world would pick up on it. But they didn't. We were the only ones who did anything about it. The South African newspapers and TV stations are run by the state, so they didn't report on it. And it just appears to have died, but it has not died. There was a ton of legal paperwork that needed to be done in order to make this secession legal internationally. So where they're at right now is what they needed the most was one other country to acknowledge their right and their country. It's now called the Sovereign State of Good Hope. And we have 5 countries lined up to acknowledge them. And the king from there to go to the UN with the acknowledgements and claim his rights to the Sovereign State of Good Hope.
We're going to have that, gentleman. Well, I'm going to have a chat with the king. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm going to have a chat with the king, and we're going to get him onto Raconteurs-news as well. So but there's a website as well, isn't it, that people can go and have a look at. Is it the? Go on, give me the website. The Cape of Hope.
Sovereign. Hang on, let me just give you the exact name for it. Give me one moment here. I don't want to give you the wrong name. Come on, open.
Well, we're just waiting for it to open up. I'll just remind you, listen to Raconteurs-news. It's news. It's Monday night, the 5th, is it? 5th of December? No, 4th of December. It's 4th of December, isn't it? Yeah. God, blimey, we're nearly closer to Christmas then.
Okay, the only official website, because there are some scam ones put up there trying to raise money off the back of this thing. The only official website is sovereignstateofgoodhope.org.
Sovereignstateofgoodhope.org.
Yeah.
Right, so folks, you need to go onto there, and there's a video on there, isn't there? I noticed there were a video of
Yes.
there I watched of the king seceding.
Yes. Now, my co-host on Conscious Consumer Network has been given the mandate by the king to be the media advisor to the sovereign states. And so we then donated that website to them. We're trying to get the word out, and we're also, because these other countries do not want to come to South Africa and sign the paperwork, because they fear, A, for their safety, and B, that they won't be allowed to leave South Africa.
Right.
King has to go to them.
Right.
And being a king, he can't just go by himself. He has to take his bodyguards, and he has to take some of his ministers with him. And they have spent in the last 2 years every cent that any of them ever hope to own in the future trying to set up this thing. So we need to raise, it's a small amount of money in the big scheme of life. It's $20,000. It's not a lot of money to set up a safe country for these oppressed people, where they will be allowed to live and to flourish under such a good governance. You have no idea. The government that they are setting up, and they don't want to call it a government, they want to call it something like a council, but we haven't fixed on the right name for it yet. They are setting it up so well that there can be no corruption. There can be no dishonesty. There can be no underhand moves, because there will be 4 tribes recognized under this: the Khoi, the Boer Nation, which is the Afrikaans-speaking peoples of South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
the Eurokaners, which are all other white people, no matter what language they speak, and the colored people are the mixed breed people. And each government post will have a representative from each of those 4 nations running that post. So to pass a law, the representative of each of the 4 nations has to agree that it's good for their people. There will be no elections. You will be hired as an employee. So the best qualified person for that position will get the job. And if he doesn't perform, he'll be fired. So there isn't room there for corruption, for being bought and sold, as I see it in all governments around the world today. And then that law will then go to the King's Council, who will decide whether it's good for the country as a whole. And then it will become law. So it will literally be by the people, for the people. And each group will have there will be no BBEEE. There will be no taking the farms back. That's in the
Constitution?
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. That in the Constitution. None of that will happen. Your firearms will not be taken away. You will have your own passport, and you will be allowed into the country if you have something to offer. So you will not be drained on the state coffers. Now, once the UN have accepted them and fly their flag at the UN, all expenses will be paid by the taxes, because immediately they will stop paying taxes to the ANC government. So the taxes that come out of the Cape will pay for everything. It is just this one push that we need funds for.
Yep.
And
like you say, you're raising funds at the moment. Like you said, did you say $20,000 is what you need? You need $20,000. Like you say, it's nothing. It's nothing. And so, if anybody can help at all, I know we've got some generous people. Just drop a couple of quid in. It would. So, where can they do that? Is that on the website, the Sovereign State of Good Hope?
We are at this moment trying to connect the donation site to it. I haven't looked in the last half hour to see whether it's up there yet. But if it isn't, you can donate on my website, and you just have to say that is what it's for, and it will automatically go there.
How is His Majesty? And I know I'll get to speak to him soon, but how is he? Does he feel nervous? Does he think that? I suppose, is he watching his back? You know, does he feel like that there might be an attempt on him if he gets any?
Yes.
Yeah. Any
they
closer?
Are very, very aware of that, and that is why once he has these letters of acknowledgement, he wants to go straight to the UN without coming back to South Africa.
Right.
Because there's a danger in that. And so he is very aware of the danger that they are in, and the white people and the colored people involved in this. The danger to them is very, very real. So they are all aware of it. And the fact that they managed to keep this totally off the radar for 2 years is amazing. Mm. It is absolutely amazing. But when we broke the news, they felt that it would be within weeks that they would go and get these letters. But it hasn't worked out that way. And the danger increases every day that passes. But the king, you'll see, Jason, a more down-to-earth, kind, caring man. He's the kind of person that you're not going to bow to, you're going to hug him. Yeah. You know, he's just, and the fact that he has looked past the terrible injustices done by black and white together to his people. They, at one stage, had a bounty on the Khoi that if you presented their top lip, you would be paid a bounty. So their lips were cut off while they were alive and handed in to get the money. And he has been willing to join hands with the same people who did that to his people, overlook the history, forgive, and see that the future of his people depended on joining hands. He said, I'm riding in this wagon. Take my hand and come and ride with me. And I just find that the bigness of heart amidst opposition from his own people, you must understand this, his own people, a lot of them were not as forgiving. And yet he took that step. I find it incredible. He is such a humble person. He has no airs and graces about him. He doesn't own anything. The gods gave it to him in curatorship. He's amazing. Your listenership will love this man. Really,
well, I'm really looking forward to speaking with him, and I'm really looking forward to getting him onto Raconteurs-news. But just so that we can say we've had a king on. I mean,
yes. For me, it was such an incredible experience, and even though I speak to the king and queen often, I still. Oh, wow, little old me talking to kings. It's an incredible thing. But he's such a good man. And his wife, their only concern is for their people. He told me a story of where he had gone. Sorry, have we got time?
Yeah, keep going.
He told me the story that had me crying on air. I couldn't speak. He had been given a huge donation of clothing, and it was towards Christmas time. So he went to a village where he thought they needed clothes, and he called on the people, And he said to this lady, what is it that you need? And she said, I need food. I have only got X amount of food for the people tonight, the children tonight. I don't know what they're going to eat. So he took his own money and he bought food for them. And he went to the next village and he said, do you need food? And they said, no, we need clothes. And my kids have just gone to school and they're being teased by the children in the school because they have got horrific clothes. And at the next village, the chief of the village said to him, we need food. So he went and bought food. But the chief said to him, could you buy a chocolate cake? Our children have never tasted chocolate cake. Could you buy a chocolate cake for these children? Jason, I cried because no matter how poor my life has been at some stages, we've always had that chocolate cake bowl for the children to lick. We take it for granted. The kids have licked the bowl. They've tasted the frosting before it's on the cake. And these children didn't even know what chocolate cake tastes.
No. And that's a tragedy in itself.
It broke my heart. I sat there on a TV show crying like a baby because it's beyond my imagining that children don't know the simple joys of baking cake with their parents. And those are the things that matter to this king, that his children taste chocolate cake in their lifetime. I can't imagine a life where your children don't know that. And that a man of his stature cares that much about the small things in life.
Yeah, you speak of him so eloquently, and I can see you, or the listeners can't see you. This is the most talking about him is the most animated that you've been. I can see it in your face, the emotion in your face that you're not just saying this, you really, really mean it. So I've just got to say, you talk so passionately. I'm so looking forward to speaking with him. Listen, we're about 20 minutes past, so is there anything you want to finish off with? I'll invite you back and we can talk whenever you want. You can come back on at any point and talk with us. It's been a
plea I would like to put out there.
Go on.
Christmas is coming, and we have over 1 million white people living in total poverty. Some of them don't even have a roof over their heads. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Their children do not go to school. So an entire generation of children is growing up uneducated and with cognitive difficulties because they are hungry. Now, South African Family Relief Project have fed, and I'm telling you this in seriousness, hundreds of thousands of white people. But recently, the South African government have cut off their access to funding. So we have reached an agreement that if donors would like to donate, they donate it through my website, and we found a way, for the moment, a short-term, round-the-system way to get money to them. What we would like to do is to give each white squatter camp in South Africa a Christmas party with food, gifts, jumping castles, and a Father Christmas. We've done this every year. But because their funding has been cut off, PayPal has frozen their accounts with $4,000 in it. They've frozen them. So they have no access to that money. We don't want to not be able to do that this year for these people. So if you feel that you would like to help to give these kids one day of joy in a year of misery, please, every dollar helps. The exchange rate is 13 Rand 50 to $1. And it goes a long way in South Africa. You can donate via my website. Just say it's for the children. And I will use our other method of getting the money to South African Family Relief.
Well, give us your website then. We need to know where your website is.
RadioFreeSouthAfrica.com.
RadioFreeSouthAfrica.com. And you do a radio show, don't you? You do one. You're going to be doing one tomorrow. So give that a plug as well.
My radio show is resolutionradio.com on Blog Talk Radio on Tuesday evenings. My TV show is on Conscious Consumer Network TV on Tuesday afternoons. And we have fascinating guests, I promise you. We have wonderful guests that will interest you. And if you have any doubts about what we have told you today about the South African situation, if you have a strong stomach, Google South African farm murders and look at the pictures. You will be sick. And these things are happening every day to whites in South Africa. And these people in the camps are the ones that we are trying to keep alive, keep a roof over their heads, keep them fed, keep their kids educated, get them to doctors, give them a place to cook, give them a toilet to use. And it costs money. And South Africans can't donate money because they don't have any. And companies are not allowed to. So all our funding comes from outside South Africa. And the ANC have done this at Christmas push to make sure we have none. So please help us. Please help us.
Right, so yeah, go to radiofreesouthafrica.com, Conscious Consumer Network. Is that .tv or is it Conscious Consumer Network?
TV. Conscious Consumer Network TV.
Conscious Consumer Network TV and South African Family Relief Project as well. Listen, I'm going to have to wrap it up. I'm starting to sweat a bit. I've got a bit of a cold and things going on. So, but thank you very much for coming along. And I know you said at the very beginning that you can't say it's been a pleasure because it's not. Talking about these subjects, it seems to me that South Africa seems to be the world's dirty secret that nobody's talking about, and it seems that there's genocide going on there. So I wish you all the best. I'll speak to you very, very soon anyway, because we'll have to get you on for another stint, and of course we've got His Royal Highness to. Although he probably wouldn't appreciate me saying that, would he? By the sounds of him,
King Kubaha Calvin Cornelius III. And you may call him King Cornelius because the rest of it is very hard for us.
Well, it's been a fascinating chat, and thank you very much for coming on, Karen. It's been, and please, if you've got any, if there's, don't hesitate to get in touch if anything new occurs, or just don't hesitate, get in touch with us. We'll put you on air. It's been a pleasure. Right, so that is it for tonight. Tomorrow night, I'm hopefully going to be here 7 till 9. I hopefully have got something for you. But things are a little bit in the air at the moment. I'm not feeling too smart either. So we'll see what happens there. So thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And if it wasn't for you, I'd just be talking to my son or just Andy or something. So thanks a lot for listening. Your support is really, really appreciated. And just this morning when I saw that one of our listeners had donated a laser printer to the Jeremy Bamber campaign, which I thought was incredible, and it just gave me that little bit of warmth inside and put a bit of a spring in my step if I'm allowed a spring. Okay, well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you very soon. I'm going to finish with this, and I hope our guest doesn't take offence, but I'm just going to finish with this. It's YouTube. It's the Spitting Image. It's a Spitting Image song from. It was a satirical TV show in the 80s, and it's called "I've Never Met a Nice South African." I have tonight, but I'm finishing off with this Spitting Image. Thank you. Thanks for listening to us. See you tomorrow.
Temple pygmies in a Monte Zuma hall. not bloody surprising, mate, 'cause we're a bunch of elegant, worsted, right black people. I once got served in Woolies after less than 4 weeks' wait. I had lunch with Rowan Atkinson when he paid and wasn't late. I know a public swimming bath where they don't piss in the pool. I know a guy who got a job straight after leaving school. I met a normal Merman and a fairly modest German, but I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of talented murderers who smell like baboons. I've had a close encounter of the 22nd kind. That's when an alien spaceship disappears up your behind. I've got directory inquiries after less than 40 rings. I've even heard a decent song by Paul McCartney's Wings. I've seen a flying pig in a quite convincing wig, but I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And it's not bloody surprising, Nick, 'cause we're a bunch of ignorant love with no sense of humour. I've met the Loch Ness Monster and he looks like Fred Astaire. At the BBC in London he's the chief commissioner. I know a place in Glasgow which is bright with daffodillies. I met the man in Kathmandu who claimed to have 2 willies. I've had a nice hot noodle, but I've never had a poodle. And I've never met a nice South African. No, he's never been a nice South African. And that's not bloody surprising, man, because we've never met one either. Except they're blatant fat, and he's emigrated to Paris. Yes, he's quite a nice South African, but he's hardly ever killed